Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green and the Socialist Party's candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program that we ran on in 2020. So no guests today. We're just going to talk about current affairs. And I think I got to start with the genocide that continues in Gaza. Yesterday, the liberal Israeli publication Haaretz had an investigation where they interviewed Israeli soldiers who told the Haaretz journalists about the genocidal intent of the Israeli military operation in Gaza. And they told them that their commanders were ordering them to shoot at the Palestinians showing up at these Gaza Humanitarian Foundation food aid sites. And they've been firing live bullets with rifles and even heavy machine guns. And they've even launched grenades, mortars, and tank shells at these people. And the Gaza Health Ministry so far has documented 549 Palestinians killed and over 4,000 wounded in these attacks. And there was one of the soldiers that they talked to said, he was stationed at a killing field. And another soldier said civilians are treated like a hostile force, even though there's no enemy, no weapons, and not a single instance of fire returned. So they're just setting these people up to be shot. It's just despicable. Now, another interesting thing that came out yesterday, and this was reported by Sharif Abdul Qudus and some of his colleagues, a couple of his colleagues. Sharif used to be a Democracy Now! Staffer, if you might be familiar with him from that. He's been for several years now, well, over a decade, I think, since the Arab uprising, the Arab Spring. He's been based in Egypt and been covering now a lot on Gaza. In the article, and we'll put this, in fact, there's an article about the Haaretz article on how Israeli commanders are ordering their soldiers to shoot at these unarmed Palestinians just showing up for food. So let's get that in the chat. And then the next article by Sharif Abdul Qudus and his colleagues, let's then get that one up. And what Sharif and them reported was that Palestinian tribes and clans and community leaders have come together to organize their own food relief, independent of this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is run by a Messianic Christian who's trying to accelerate Judgment Day. And they were able this week to secure entry of dozens of UN aid trucks and get them to UN warehouses, and then have the food distributed in an orderly way that also kept the food away from criminal organizations. The article describes how the Israelis have let some of these criminal organizations, let me get my notes here, how some of these criminal organizations, the Israelis have enabled to steal the food and then sell it at exorbitant prices in these markets. So this, it's community-based people, independent of Hamas or anybody else, have somehow got some UN aid food trucks in. The article isn't clear how they got them past the Israelis' blockade, but that's what they reported. And of course, the Israelis are saying this was a Hamas operation and they're going to stop it. So we should keep an eye on that. But what I think we need to keep pushing is an arms embargo of Israel, where we don't have the votes, but there is a vote coming up, hopefully in the House soon. There was a vote in the Senate, and we got to hold these people accountable for genocide come the next midterm elections, whether you're running a green against them or just raising it in the campaign. It's something that, unfortunately, we don't have much leverage until then. But, the street protests right now, the Democrats can just let that roll off their backs because they're not being challenged by an independent political movement that is for human rights for Palestinians as well as everybody in Israel and Palestine. So let's keep pushing on the arms embargo. And while we're talking right now on Saturday afternoon in the East Coast, the U.S. Senate is debating whether to bring up for debate. What do they call that vote? You need 60 votes to bring it to the floor for a debate over the so-called big, beautiful bill that Trump's been pushing, which is a totally reactionary bill that is going to create more big tax cuts for the rich. They're going to pay for it partly by cuts to social programs, but especially by just raising the deficit. The Congressional Budget Office and others say if it passes with these tax cuts, the national debt's going to grow by 4 or 5 trillion more dollars in the next decade. And at the rate we're going, in a couple of years, servicing the national debt, the interest payments are going to be the largest single item in the federal budget, bigger than the military budget, bigger than Social Security benefits, which is now the biggest item. It's insane. And we, of course, should be advocating for more progressive taxation. It's better to pay for, regular services up front than to borrow through the bond market, which means the rich buy the bonds and then we pay them interest for it. So tax them up front. Don't borrow from the rich and pay interest to them and make them richer. There is, reason to go into debt, like for a Green New Deal that would rapidly build out the new infrastructure we need to decarbonize the economy and mitigate climate change. But this is just paying for regular services. And so we don't know if the Senate is going to be able to get that procedural vote passed, and then they'll go to the regular vote, which will require a majority. The Senate parliamentarian put a monkey wrench in the gears because the parliamentarian said some of the provisions related to Medicaid were policy changes, not just budget. And so they would have to pass separately with a 60-vote margin, filibuster-proof margin. But even with that, the overall bill is totally reactionary. And unfortunately, the Democrats, well, let me say this. This bill is about the only thing this do-nothing Congress is going to pass before the midterms. Republicans have no reforms. They're letting Trump pass, write executive orders, and that ends up in the courts, and Congress is just a bystander. But they do have to pass the next budget. And unfortunately, when Minority Leader Chuck Schumer for the Democrats caved in on the Republicans' continuing resolution last March, which was to keep the government funded for the next 6 months, it became clear that the Democrats are not going to put up a fight against the Republicans' reactionary budget policies. So it's all the more reason for us to be organizing a green response. As I've been saying, I think we're not ready to seriously contest for congressional power where we can make a difference, but we can start by electing thousands instead of hundreds locally. And with the credibility that those local election officials have and the experience we gain in those campaigns, we can then build up to the point where we can begin electing people to the House and provide a real opposition to the two corporate party system of corporate rule. So we're watching that happen, and it's not pretty. And we can protest, but we don't have the leverage because we don't have an independent political movement in this country. The Democrats are the thing that most of the street demonstrations were begging and pleading for them to do things, and mostly if they don't want to do them, they can say, well, what are we going to do? Vote for the Republicans? Of course we're not. So they take the progressive vote for granted. Which brings up the Mamdani campaign. I talked a lot about that last week, but I want to talk some more about it and just bring some things that we didn't talk about up to mind, and also maybe reiterate a few things. The first thing people should understand is that while the primary was ranked choice voting, the general election is a plurality election. So they have this Frankenstein, half RCV and half plurality winner take all plurality election. And the Democrats set that up on purpose. I've talked to one of the Democrats' hack lawyers that was on the charter commission that designed this Frankenstein. And, what I mean by that is ranked choice voting for the primaries and plurality take all for the general election. And, he made it clear that the Democrats wanted a rational way to determine the primary nominee in crowded fields, particularly for mayor. So the nominee didn't win with a delegitimizing, small 20 or 30% of the vote. So now with ranked choice voting, they get a majority. But on the other hand, they absolutely did not want competition from the Greens in the general election. So they didn't want ranked choice voting there, because ranked choice voting will take away the impact of the spoiler effect. And so Greens would get a larger vote, and, in some districts might be competitive and could elect people to the council. And Greens, argued for ranked choice voting in the general as well as the primaries when they had the Charter Commission at hearings, and some even proposed proportional ranked choice voting for the city council, which New York City had between 1936 and 1947. And in those years, they had 5, sometimes 6 parties after each election in the council. And now it's back to, it's like 51, there are 51 members, and it's like 47 Democrats and 4 Republicans. And it was like that before they went to proportional ranked choice voting in the 30s and 40s. And the damn Republicans voted, and the Republicans got their fair share, which was maybe 20% of the seats, but it was more than just having 1 or 2 back then. I think it was 25 members on the council. When they went to proportional representation, they increased the number, but still, the Republicans were marginal. Then they got their fair share under ranked choice voting. Then they voted to get rid of proportional representation, and they, made themselves marginal again. But, that's how the 2 corporate party system works. They really on the same side of most issues, particularly the ones that matter to the rich, which in New York is Wall Street and the real estate industry in particular. So the ranked choice voting in primaries also applies to those 51 council seats. And that's where the Greens could have really made a difference. But that's where the hacks on the Charter Commission, the Democratic Party hacks, knew, the Greens might be competition. So they made the general elections plurality take all. So that's how that we got to this mess. And where it's at now is the corporate Democrats and the Republicans are getting together and plotting how to back an alternative to Mamdani. Wall Street billionaires like Bill Ackman, who's a big Trump funder, and Michael Bloomberg, they're saying they could raise $100 million overnight for a viable alternative to Mamdani. So who's running? Cuomo is a question mark. He's exploring. There's upwards of 3 million voters who normally vote who didn't vote in the Democratic primary. So no doubt Cuomo's polling to see if he has a shot if he could get those votes. But there's Eric Adams, who's like Cuomo, a corrupt, disgraced politician. And he's in Trump's pocket because Trump dropped corruption charges against him, had the Justice Department do that, in return for Eric Adams working with Homeland Security on rounding up undocumented immigrants. So he probably is not viable. The Republicans have Curtis Sliwa, who's, always sort of been in the news in New York, is the Guardian Angels vigilante group leader. And he's really a clown, but Republicans have tried to talk him to get off the line. He said he's not, so he'll be on the ballot. There's an accomplished lawyer, an independent named Jim Walden. He's running as a centrist. He's actually kind of liberal, at least on social policy, but he has low name recognition. They could get behind him. They're also talking about doing a write-in candidate. Richie Torres, the ultra-Zionist Puerto Rican legislator or member of the House now from the Bronx, seems to be top of their list, but I'm sure they're vetting other people. And don't count that out. I mean, remember India Walton in Boston? She was an upstart in Boston, in Buffalo. She won the Democratic primary against the incumbent Byron Boston, I think is his name. And, he's a centrist in the pocket of the real estate industry up there. She won the primary. And then the establishment Democrats and the Republicans got together and organized a write-in campaign behind the incumbent who lost the Democratic primary, and the incumbent won. So don't count that out as a scenario in New York. What happened to Walton after that was, after the Democrats did that to her, she went into liberal Democratic organizations. She's been on the staff of Citizen Action and Roots Action in the Working Families Party. She tried to get on the city council in 2023, and she lost the Democratic primary badly, like 61 to 39%, because the establishment wasn't even going to give her another chance. So with 3 to 5 serious candidates possible in the general election for New York City mayor, the winner could receive less than 35, even less than 30%, which would really undermine the mandate of whoever is elected, including Mamdani. So that's one reason why, the Greens should be, if nothing else, making the case in New York City and using it to talk everywhere, because a lot of people are following this, that New York City needs ranked choice voting for the general as well as the primary election. So that's one point, that this thing's not over, and that they got a plurality winner general election, which opens the door for a establishment-backed candidate who doesn't have majority support, but because it's not ranked choice voting, could end up winning. I think another thing to take away from this situation is how Mamdani ran a campaign with clear and concrete messaging. He focused on a clear theme, affordability, and he highlighted a few concrete demands like fast and free buses, free or at least subsidized childcare, rent freeze on rent-regulated apartments, and some other demands like that. But they were demands that people could grasp and believe in. And I think those kind of concrete demands are much more effective than the more abstract slogans that Greens, I think, tend to use, like accessible mass transit, child care as a public good, affordable housing. Those are concepts. They're not demands. And so I think when we're running, we should, our demands should link to concrete policies that people can easily grasp and get behind. That's a lot more believable for a voter you're trying to persuade than child care as a public good. It's just an abstraction. Another thing, and Mamdani, I heard this week talk about this. He said he was listening, not lecturing. And when I've talked about deep canvassing, I've said we got to go out and listen and not preach. But I like listening, not lecturing. It alliterates. And that's how he described his approach to voters. And it's, the same idea as deep canvassing. I think he's probably familiar with that because of his previous campaign organizing experiences. And the basic idea is you have an empathetic conversation to build a relationship and find common ground, rather than the traditional canvassing of a fast, fact-filled pitch and ask for support. There's a lot of social science literature that shows that this is much more effective in persuading people. And there's evidence that Mamdani's campaign changed people's perceptions of the issue. And the canvas probably had a lot to do with that. I think his very effective social media and actually paid TV media did that. But early on, like in the middle of winter, the top issue for voters was crime. And that was up Cuomo's alley and Eric Adams' alley. And Mamdani apparently changed people's minds. Now the top issue is housing and economics related to affordability. And crime is down the list. And I think Mamdani's campaign changed that. So we have an article that we'll post in the chat titled Mamdani is showing Dems don't have to chase voter opinion. They can shape it. And that just goes to deep canvassing where you listen and not lecture. And that's the kind of thing Greens should be doing. We're not, the Mamdani campaign mobilized 50,000 volunteers and they knocked on 1.5 million doors. There's no Green local that has that capacity. But at the scale of city council races, town council races, even state legislative races in a lot of states, we have that capacity now. And that's the kind of grassroots campaigning and canvassing we need to do. And I think that's a takeaway from the Mamdani campaign. I think another one is that you need a mass party, not just a core of activists. But Mamdani started out with a large core organization, the New York City Democratic Socialists of America, which different reports have it between 5,000 and 9,000 members. There's no Green local like that. Their standard dues in DSA are $15 a month or $180 a year. I mean, do the math. 5,000 members of standard dues generates $900,000 a year. 9,000 members generates 1.6 million. So with those kind of resources, you can hire the staff to organize the members of your mass party. And of course, that was the core from which the Mamdani campaign built out to 50,000 volunteers for their canvass, which is incredible. DSA also is a movement organization, not just electoral organization. So they're out in different kinds of issue campaigns and public action, street protests, which raises their profile and recruits more members. So I think the lesson for the Greens, if we want to be serious about taking on the two corporate party system, we need to get serious about organizing a dues-paying mass membership party. And right now the national party's got an annual budget of 166,000. I mean, come on. Now, if the national party's not ready, or even your state party's not ready to set themselves up as a dues-paying mass membership party, do it at the local level and start winning some significant local races and demonstrate how this works. And then we can bring it up to the states and hopefully the national. Now, the other 2 points I want to make, and then I'm going to stop, is Mamdani remains a Democrat. He's a loyal Democrat. And we'll put an article about this before the primary election, right close to it, an article by a former DSA member who's now a journalist, talked to leaders of Mamdani's campaign, the DSA, the Working Families Party, and they were already saying that if Mamdani didn't win the Democratic primary, they probably wouldn't run him on the Working Families Party line. Working Families had a stand-in candidate, a lawyer who was easily switched to a judicial race. She doesn't have to live in that district. She doesn't have to win. And then they can leave the line blank. So they were already set up to do that. So the thing to realize is that, Mamdani is a loyal Democrat. They weren't going to challenge Cuomo if he won the primary. They're just going to let it go, even if, kind of passively supporting him without much effort or statements. And then you have to realize if Mamdani had lost the primary, or if he loses the general election, he has to go back to the state assembly. And if he doesn't support the party's nominees, including terrible ones like Andrew Cuomo, or in, like the governor's race next month or next year, Hochul, the Democratic leadership and the caucus in the assembly would ostracize him. And it would just make it very hard for him to do any, function at all as a legislator, get any of his priorities advanced. So there's that constraint on being in the Democratic Party, and he's enmeshed in the pro-corporate constraints of the Democratic Party power structure in other ways. Like if he does become mayor, to implement his platform, he needs tax increases on high earners and big businesses that have to be approved by the state. So he's going to have to go to Governor Hochul and the Democratic leadership in the state legislature. And those people oppose tax increases, even on the rich. And then on the other hand, she's going to want his endorsement for her reelection next year. So I kind of expect if he's the mayor, he's going to endorse Hochul, who's a corrupt, centrist corporate Democrat in the mold of Andrew Cuomo, who appointed her as his lieutenant governor. And she's only the governor because Cuomo had to resign in disgrace because of his sexual harassment, accusations. And not so much, but it should have been because of what he did to all those people who died in nursing homes during the COVID outbreak. He sent people there where they didn't have protection. A lot of people died. And, he kind of tried to cover that up. So she's in his mold. So I expect him to endorse Hochul and then still not get the tax increases he wants because of who the power structure of the Democratic Party is in New York. So that's what you get inside the Democratic Party. And a final point, I didn't write this in my notes, but I've been thinking about it. When we challenge and build up local elected officials, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves by taking executive authority before we've got legislative majorities. Otherwise, you're stuck administering the system as it is rather than able to make changes because you need legislative support. So you want to aim at getting the majority or at least a substantial minority on a city council before you run for mayor. Or you should run for mayor when you expect your colleagues to be elected with you so you can enact your agenda. Otherwise, you end up disappointing people who voted for you for your agenda because in cities, we're talking mostly about Democrats, they're going to block your agenda. So we should be building up our electoral base, our base of elected officials in the legislative branch, and not aim for the executive branch until we got the majority in the legislative branch to vote through the changes we want to make. So let me stop there, and still went on longer than I'd planned to, but we got more than half an hour for your questions and comments, so I'm looking forward to them. Scout Trooper 164, any reaction to House Democrats stopping Trump from being elected? Not the first to say this, but Hakeem Jeffries and Schumer need to get out of Congress. Yeah, I saw a clip of Nancy Pelosi discouraging movement toward impeachment. Of course, now you're just educating and talking because the Republicans aren't going to impeach Trump in the House because the Republicans have the majority in the House. So for Pelosi to get out there and, quash it just doesn't make any sense to me. And, Hakeem Jeffries isn't supporting impeachment. He's the Democrats' leader in the House. And Schumer, I just talked about how he caved on these Republican budget priorities back during the continuing resolution debate in March. Yeah, they need to get out of Congress, but the Democratic Party's not going to challenge them. Schumer's getting up there in years, but he's probably got, another term in him that he wants to run. And Jeffries is young. He's the only under 70 leader in the House that the Democrats have. So they're not going to challenge him either. So maybe we should say not that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer need to get out of Congress, but we need to get the Democrats out of Congress. We need to replace them as a real opposition. Scott Trooper 164, any thoughts on Trump taking FEMA money so he can fund an Alcatraz camp? Yeah, it's dumb. When I was finishing high school, a group of Indians took over Alcatraz after it had been shut down. And I know some of them. One of them was the Early Green, Anna Rondon from the Diné or Navajo reservation. And, and also one of the leaders of that trying to remember his name, Richard Oakes. Three of his cousins were in the local Green Party chapter. A couple of them have died, but one of them's still in it. So I'm very familiar with that. Alcatraz is, it should be rehabilitated into a park. In fact, I think it may be. They maybe take tourists on trips out there. It's just a waste of money. I mean, Alcatraz, Trump, he's looking for headlines. I don't even think he's serious about that. If they're serious about rehabilitating that for a prison, it's symbolic more than functional. So, it's just another stupid Trump idea. Vicky Corden, any thoughts on Supreme Court taking power away from lower courts? So Trump wins because of Supreme Court decisions. Yeah, I've been listening, and it's kind of complicated. What happened with this was a case related to, or cases related to birthright citizenship. And as I understand it, they basically said, well, let the states decide their policy on that, and let people sue in the courts. But Alito said, I don't want to see a class action suit, which these right-wing justices have been discouraging. So it's chaos now. I was listening to a little thing on the radio where they were asking a lawyer, or maybe it was just healthcare officials or public officials. Maybe it was public officials. So what are doctors and nurses going to do now when they write out a birth certificate? Are they going to, check the papers of the parent to decide whether they can give them the baby citizenship? And the government doesn't know what it's going to do yet. I guess it's a 30-day period. I'm not sure what they're waiting for. Maybe it's 30 days before the decision goes into effect. But, the general trend toward denying the courts the right to interpret laws based on their constitutionality. So what are the courts there for? It's strengthening the unitary executive, which is a right-wing theory that wants to make the president like a king, beyond the constraints of the courts or the Congress. So I think, without having read and absorbed the details, that's my reaction to what I've heard in the news. It's bad, and it's strengthening Trump and undermining judges in federal courts. Their ability to write honest decisions about, cases before them based on the Constitution. Scout Trooper 164. The thing is, the Democratic leadership doesn't want to shape opinion. They just pretend that they will do while taking in billionaire money and not caring at all what the working and poor class think. Yeah, I've been saying that, the problem with the Democratic leadership and the power structure is that it's dominated by the rich funders and the upper middle class professionals who are the politicians and the campaign operatives and the people in the affiliated nonprofits, the think tanks, and the advocacy organizations. And these people, they're basically corporate neoliberals. They're socially liberal compared to their Republican counterparts, but they just don't want to tax themselves so we can have decent public services. And that's, really what it comes down to. The Democratic Party is not reformable because of who's in charge and its structure. You can't take that structure over. It's dominated by the money. You can work your way on to county committees, even state committees, even the national committee. But that's not what makes the decision. It's the money that makes the decision. The money is in the hands of the DNC has money, but also the Congressional Campaign Committee, the Democratic Senate Congressional Campaign Committee, and of course the super PACs. And that's what dominates Democratic primaries and the general elections that they support. And there's no way a progressive movement's going to dislodge that. And all the progressive movement does inside the Democratic Party is make it look better than it is. That's one of my criticisms of Mandani. He puts a progressive veneer on a thoroughly, at best, center-right party. The Democrats would be right at home with the Christian Democrats in Germany. They're a center-right party on the political spectrum of the industrial world. And the Democratic Party doesn't want to shape opinion. They don't even want the public to really know what their options are. They just want to use money to run on social liberalism and the same fiscal conservatism that the Republicans have. And there's a huge political vacuum for an independent progressive movement like the Greens aspire to be. But it's going to take organizing. And I say, start in your community, build a party there. And when we got a lot of strong local parties that are electing people, then we can figure out how to come together at a national level in a way that actually can support the organizing and raise the money. Because right now, the Greens can't do that and nobody else can either. Charles Keener, Mamdani would have zero chance of becoming mayor if he wasn't a Democratic Socialist. He had no other choice. Third party would not get him there. I agree. If he had run as an independent, he would not have got much traction. He'd have to be getting it now after the Democrats nominated. Although with Cuomo as the nominee, he might have had a better chance. I think a better example is Bernie Sanders, who had good name recognition. Wonder if what would have happened if he'd have run as an independent in 2015 and 2016? Would he have caught on like he did in the Democratic primary? He might have. But I think that goes back to me saying we need to build a strong foothold in the legislative side before we go after executive power. If we had, 20 Greens or even 15 or 10 Greens on the New York City Council, then running a Green for mayor, it would have to be paid attention to. And a candidate with Mamdani's skill and organization could then, run a credible campaign as an independent. So I think, if Mamdani wins, he's going to face the power structure of the Democratic Party. And then he's not going to be able to get done what he hopes to. I think a negative example is Brandon Johnson in Chicago. Another DSA member came out of the Chicago Teachers Union, and his approved, what do you call it, favorability rating is 6 or 7% in the latest polls. I mean, that's like a record low for anybody. I mean, Blagojevich, the crook that tried to sell a Senate seat, had a higher rating. I think he was like 18% when he left office. It's people are pretty bitterly disappointed, and that's, I think, a case where the movement got ahead of itself by being able to get elected mayor but not being able to deliver on promises. So that's my comment on that. I wouldn't put zero chance, but I agree it'd be much tougher to run as a Green candidate in New York when we haven't even elected anybody to the city council. That's the first step. And also the state legislature. The state legislative districts are 130,000 population. The council districts are 170,000. And the council races are every 4 years. The city races are the city council races every 2 years, every 4 years. City 4 years. The state legislative races are every 2 years. So, that's maybe where the Greens in New York City should try to get a foothold in the system. Actually, DSA has done that. They've elected members or people they support to both the state legislature, the state assembly, and the state senate. So I think that's the approach we need to take. And, I don't think we should be, bashing Mamdani. I think we should be defending him from the racism he's experiencing, the red baiting he's experiencing, and without necessarily endorsing him as Greens, just saying, this racism and red baiting is ridiculous. It's stupid. People like Senator Gillibrand, went on major CNN, I think, and said the most ridiculous racist stuff about Mamdani, Islamophobic crap, and we need to criticize her for that and defend Mamdani from that kind of mean-spirited attacks. I think that's probably the best thing Greens can do in this election. And if I was in New York City, I'd vote for him in the general election for sure. But also, recognizing that inside the Democratic Party, he's got to win inside the Democratic Party against the corporate establishment before he can even take on the Republicans. And in New York State, really the Democrats run the state. They got the majority in both houses of the state legislature. So that's where his opposition is going to come from. It's going to come from the Democrats, even though he is a Democrat. At War with Dust. Did you happen to catch Bernie Sanders on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast? Sounded like a couple of Marxists, with Rogan, who endorsed Trump, agreeing with much of what Sanders had to say. I did not see that. I did see a little video. I watched part of it about Crockett, the member of Congress from Texas. I'm forgetting her first name. And she was basically, and this was talking about racism and reverse racism, and she very calmly explained to Rogan, what the Black experience has been, dealing with the financial system and the political system and things like that. And the way the video summarized it is Rogan was speechless. He couldn't answer her. So what's her name? The Congresswoman Crockett from Texas. What's her first name? Jasmine. Thank you, At War with Us. He put it in the chat. Yeah. So having looked at that, I'm not surprised that Bernie could, have Joe Rogan agreeing with him on, the policies Sanders advocates, which, Sanders is also good at being concrete in what he demands, like Medicare for all. That's his signature issue. Everybody gets what that means. And it's better than saying healthcare is a human right, as a campaign slogan. You want the demands to be concrete so people can say, yeah, I know what that means, and I could see it happening. And so it's realistic and it's understandable. Scout Trooper 164, although I dislike what he has done before, what are your views of Gavin Newsom taking on Trump? I feel like that's the one thing I can give credit where credit's due. I haven't followed him closely. I know he was going on right-wing media, Fox News, right-wing bloggers, Joe Rogan, and I'm not sure what, he's trying to, I guess, position himself as a moderate, middle-of-the-roader for a presidential campaign. But what does he actually stand for? I mean, what I know about him is, he made sure they didn't get single payer in California. He killed some of the solar energy initiatives. He's promoting nuclear power. So, what he criticized Trump for doing was, federalizing the National Guard to send them into LA where, they really weren't needed for, to stop the so-called riots. Those were nonviolent protests almost totally. So, Trump gave Newsom a good platform to make an obvious statement that maybe he's covering up some of the other things he's done that deserve strong criticism. So, what's my view on him taking on Trump? Well, on the National Guard issue, fine. That was good. I'll give him credit for that. But there's a lot of other things that Newsom is, on the same side as Trump, like nuclear power. He was supposed to shut down. he delayed the shutdown of Diablo Canyon nukes. Had agreed to it, then delayed it. I mean, this guy is he's a corporate Democrat. You can't rely on him for the environment or economic justice or healthcare. Scout Trooper 164. Also, is Russia's non-response to Iran a result of that deal despite a 20-year security agreement before Trump's inauguration? Or is it because they're secretly being chipped away in Ukraine? Well, I think the deal wasn't like Article 5 of NATO, where presumably NATO, all NATO will come to the defense of any NATO country that's attacked. That wasn't the kind of agreement Russia had with Iran. I don't know the details, but it probably meant, exchanging military technology and joint training and things like that. So I'm not surprised that Russia didn't get involved in the, war between U.S., Israel, and on one side and Iran on the other. I think, Russia probably thought Iran's not worth World War III, which, is, I'm glad they made that decision. And I don't know, it is true that I don't think because they're bogged down in Ukraine and not able to project power as much as they were before, like, in the case of Syria, I don't think that's really the reason why they didn't get involved. Putin also has a long-standing relationship with Netanyahu and Israel. And there are, millions, like between 1 and 2 million dual citizens, Russian and Israeli. Many of them live in Russia. Putin wants their votes when he runs his little staged elections. Netanyahu wants their votes. So they have had a good relationship. And in fact, I wrote an article, maybe Anna can find it. I think it was called Sergei Lavrov and Vulgar Anti-Imperialism. And Lavrov, who's the foreign minister of Russia, said last fall that what Netanyahu's doing in Gaza is what we're doing in Ukraine. That's basically what he said. He said Netanyahu wants to destroy Hamas. Lavrov said that sounds like denazification we're doing in Ukraine. And he said Russia wants to demilitarize Ukraine. That sounds like Israel destroying Hamas in Gaza. And what was remarkable about that is he said it in a news conference in Russia, but then Russia Today, which is, state media that puts the Russian position out to the world, underscored that. And one of the things they underscored in their article was that Israel has not provided any arms to Ukraine. So that's an example of how close Russia and Israel are and how much Russia values its relationship to Israel. It's a matter of getting technology. There are a lot of Israeli technical people living in Russia, a lot of them dual citizens, and that's important for Russia. So they want to keep that relationship. So, I called, when I said vulgar anti-imperialism, I was calling out those people who basically say whatever the U.S. is doing, we take the opposite position. And here they are opposing what the Israelis are doing in Gaza, but basically supporting what the Russians are doing in Ukraine. And there was Lavrov, spilling the beans out loud. And they can't be consistent anti-imperialists. They're campus, they're in the camp of anybody opposed to the U.S., even if, the camp or the country they're supporting is reactionary, committing war crimes and so forth. So anyway, I don't know if Jasmine can find that. I think the title was Sergei Lavrov and Vulgar Anti-Imperialism. That was published in Against the Current. So anyway, that's why I think Russia didn't get involved. They have a relationship with Israel too, and they don't want to change. They don't want to disrupt that. Scout Trooper 164. Is it true that despite the think tank by neoconservatives being long gone, ideas of wanting complete regime change is still going on? While Trump used that so Russia can have Ukraine. 3 of 3. So, maybe this is the third one. I'm not sure what think tank you're referring to. Neoconservatives have wanted to go after Iran and do regime change for a long time. Trump is leery of getting involved in a forever war in the Middle East. So it doesn't surprise me that he wants to cut a deal with Iran as soon as possible on their nuclear program, and he actually chastised Netanyahu for continuing heavy bombardment after the peace deal or the ceasefire had been agreed to. So, some neoconservatives, I think, are disappointed that regime change in Iran wasn't pursued. And let's talk about that for a minute. So then what? Who takes over? The military, the Revolutionary Guard. There's no force that's organized, certainly not with arms to defend itself, except the Balak Liberation Movement. But they're just a part of the country and a minority. Change has got to come in in Tehran from within Iran. And, destroying the regime and then letting them fight it out is just a recipe for the kind of chaos we've seen in Libya and in Syria. Although I don't think it was the West that destroyed the Assad regime. The Assad regime destroyed its own people. And now they got to deal with an Islamist government that, talks pluralism and democracy, but really isn't practicing it. So the Syrian revolution has to continue. But those are, you can't just blow up a regime and then expect the people to pick up the pieces. A movement to change the regime in Iran would have to develop, get organized, and have a clear program and, be ready to govern when it took power. And it's not there. So regime change is a bad idea. And in this case, Trump was smart not to, support Israel's interest in doing that. I think Israel's interest, and it's been kind of the Western imperial interest in the Middle East for a long time, is to make states weak and divided and balkanized. So, that would be, I guess what I'm saying is it might be in the interest of Western imperialism, but it wouldn't be in the interest of the Iranian people if regime change is imposed by outside military force. Andrew Hager. Howie, how do you plan to guide more Americans to registering for the Green Party? Well, what I'm saying is all of us, where we are, need to build strong local parties. And that's more than just registering with the state, with the Green Party, which you can only do in 32 states and DC. 19 other jurisdictions, because there are 51 counting DC, you don't register in a party. You go to the primary and say which party ballot you want to vote in, except in California and Washington, where they have nonpartisan primaries. And then you got a jungle primary with everybody from every party's in one primary. And in those two states, the top two advance to the general, which is, undermines parties' ability to make their own nominations. So I think much more important than telling the state which party you're in is telling the local party you're in it and, documenting that or showing how serious you are by paying, reasonable standard dues so the party has some resources to work with. So that's a matter of organizing. It's a matter of going out and talking to people and recruiting. And if you're going to be a mass party, you're going to have to reach more than the usual suspects who are already ready for independent political action. I think the field where you're going to find the most people are progressive Democrats who know how bad the Democratic Party is, but feel it's their only option. They vote the lesser evil. And then non-voters who are progressive leaning, but just disgusted with the whole thing. And, maybe the Greens can convince them that it's worth getting involved in the Green Party to make changes. So I think those are the people we need to recruit. And it's a matter of becoming members, not just registering with the party. Scout Trooper 164. Howie, I need your thoughts on this. So this is made up of many parts. I remember back from a video I saw on Jake Bro regarding the actions of Iran and how Trump handles Russia. Okay, that's the first part. It was similar. The next part of that was up and then it went down. See if I can find it in the chat. It was similar to the Project for a New America. I know I caught that part. And, that was the neocons basically planned to redesign the Middle East under U.S. hegemony. It was similar to the Project for a New America of wanting regime change in the Middle East to favor Western democracy. And thus, the idea was to deal with Russia to get Ukraine, U.S. to get Iran. Okay, so yeah, the Project for New America, that I think it was a Project for a New American Century. They gave lip service to democracy, but when they got Iraq, what did they do? They basically divided people ethnically. They were more interested in marketization of the economy and destroying the public sector than instituting a real democracy. And the idea was to deal with Russia to get Ukraine and U.S. to get Iran. So you're saying it supported Russia getting Ukraine? I don't recall that. I think it was focused more on the Middle East. I will say that, the American leadership has never really been that supportive of Ukraine. If you remember the Chicken Kyiv speech that George H.W. Bush gave, he told the Ukrainians, don't vote for independence. And a few weeks later, they did by 92%. But he didn't want them to. And then when the Russians went in and grabbed Crimea in 2014, Obama didn't want to do anything because he wanted the Russians' help in closing that Iran nuclear deal. But he also said later in an interview it was in the Atlantic with Jeffrey Goldberg, the guy that got on that Signal chat recently among Trump officials. He's a journalist with the Atlantic. He interviewed Obama around 2016, 17. And the article is called The Obama Doctrine. And in there, Obama said, look, Ukraine is in Russia's sphere of influence. We can't do much about that. So I think that's been true. I mean, I think even Biden was very reluctant, but forced to get in to defend Ukraine. Remember, before Russia's full-scale invasion, all Biden was talking about was sanctions if Russia did. And he even equivocated, well, if it's a large-scale invasion, we'll do sanctions. If it's a small incursion, maybe not. And all we sent him was, some Javelin missiles, anti-tank missiles, shoulder-fired anti-tank missiles, but really didn't build up their military when it was obvious. And Biden's own intelligence, the U.S. own intelligence, was saying Russia's planning to invade, and it was pretty obvious. They were amassed on the Ukrainian border, 150, 200,000 troops. So the people at the campus that argue the U.S. has been out to disassemble the Russian Federation and Ukraine was the wedge and NATO expansion. The behavior of, the leadership of the U.S., Democratic and Republican, just doesn't confirm that theory. It's pretty much the opposite. I think what happened to Biden was people, including the American public, and in Europe, the same thing, were so outraged at Russia's invasion that they demanded their governments, send arms to Ukraine to defend itself. So they were kind of pushed into that position. And then even, after Biden had been doing it for a while, I heard this when I was in Ukraine from everybody, left, right, and center. Biden isn't really supporting us. He's given us enough to hold the Russians off at the current front line, but not enough to win the damn war. And he had escalation management. So, every new weapon system the Ukrainians wanted, at first it was no, then it was maybe, then it was finally yes, but then it got there slow. And so the Ukrainians, the U.S. was telling them to go on a big counteroffensive in 2023, and Zelensky saying, we don't have the weapons for it. And, they did make one attempt at a, big maneuver in the south in Zaporizhia, and didn't work out so well. So they changed, and they had a couple of areas where they were pushing, but by a different tactic of to reduce their losses, which I think was a smart move on their part. So anyway, I don't think the neocons, were saying that let Russia have Ukraine. And on the other hand, they didn't prevail in because I think most of them did want to arm Ukraine, but they, the leadership from George H.W. Bush through Joe Biden, and now, of course, Trump, never was with that. They never were for really arming Ukraine with what it needs to defend itself and push the Russians out. Okay, I'm getting the slogan. I see one question from Joanna Munley, who had a question last week we didn't get to, so I'm going to answer that. What are your thoughts about Senator Van Hollen during 2025? Example, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Senator Van Hollen went down to El Salvador to see how he is doing. Do you think he would ever run for president? He maintains civility and keeps the facts. Yeah, I think he's, pretty decent as Democrats go. I think, maybe he'd run for president. I haven't heard a lot of talk about that. And, if I was in his state, I would try to work with him on, issues where I think I might move him, like why doesn't he introduce in the Senate a companion bill to the bill in the House for ranked choice voting for the House and Senate? It'd be proportional ranked choice voting for the House. It's a good bill. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I've posted the links to it many times in this podcast. Or a bill for why don't we have ranked choice vote for president? Get rid of the Electoral College. So I think he's decent enough that you could at least have that conversation, or at least raise it with him, and him or his staff would get back to you. So as senators go, he's not so bad. As far as running for president, I'm not thinking about president. I think, the Greens should run somebody in 2028 because it helps maintain ballot lines or get ballot lines, acquire them. It enables, at a certain scale to get our policy platform out there and educate people about that. And it recruits new members. But it should not get so much attention in those presidential years as our local campaigns. That's where I think our priority should be. So I guess our time is up for this week. Next week, I will be at the Socialism 2025 conference in Chicago, speaking on panels. I'm debating some DSA people and people like that on independent politics, and I'll be presenting on a Ukraine solidarity panel and staffing some tables. We got Ukraine Solidarity Network there. So I won't be able to do the podcast live, but I have a taped interview with Australian Greens Senator David Shoebridge. So I hope people will tune in for that next week. It's about AUKUS, it's AUKUS, the military agreement between Australia, the US, and UK about nuclear submarine basing in Australia, and theoretically eventually providing Australia with its own nuclear attack submarines by the 2040s. And a lot of Australians are skeptical that will ever happen. But, Shoebridge and the Greens want to end this alliance because it's promoting nuclear proliferation and militarization of the Asia Pacific region. So, tune in for that next week. And then the week after that, I'll be back and we can talk about what happened at Socialism 2025 and if this reactionary spending bill got passed, Gaza, Ukraine, Iran, there's a lot going on, Sudan, immigration, a lot of issues. So I hope everybody, like I've been saying, your activism makes a difference, so don't get discouraged. Stay at it, and we'll get there. So everybody have a good week.